The Kaibar was all I had left. Everything else was gone: my supplies, my equipment, my carefully laid plans. The bush plane that was supposed to drop me at a remote hunting lodge had crashed into the side of a mountain in the Yukon wilderness, killing the pilot instantly and leaving me stranded in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth with nothing but the clothes on my back and the Marine Corps combat knife on my belt. 40 days. That's how long I survived in temperatures that regularly dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. 40 days with no tent, no sleeping bag, no GPS, no radio. 40 days of hunting with primitive traps, melting snow for water, building shelters from scratch, and fighting off frostbite, starvation, and the creeping despair that comes from complete isolation in a frozen wilderness that stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. My name is Jack Morrison, former Marine Corps Infantry, Force Recon. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in the Arctic Warfare Training Program in Norway. After I left the service, I became a wilderness guide and survival instructor, teaching people how to stay alive in extreme environments. I'd spent years in the backcountry, led dozens of expeditions, survived situations that would break most people. I thought I knew what survival meant. I thought I was prepared for anything, but nothing prepares you for a plane crash in the middle of nowhere. Nothing prepares you for the moment when you realize that nobody knows exactly where you are, that the emergency locator transmitter was destroyed in the impact, that rescue might never come, and that your survival depends entirely on your training, your will to live, and one 7-inch carbon steel blade that's been with you since boot camp. This is the story of how that Kaibar saved my life. How I used it to build shelters, make fire, hunt game, fashion tools, defend myself against predators, and ultimately signal the rescue team that found me 40 days later, 28 pounds lighter, frostbitten, and barely alive but alive. It's a story about the limits of human endurance, about putting military training to the ultimate test, and what happens when you re-stripped down to the absolute basics of survival with nothing between you and death except 7 inches of steel and the refusal to quit. Let me tell you something about the Kaibar. It's been standard issue for the United States Marine Corps since 1942. 7-inch carbon steel blade, leather handle, and a legacy that's survived every war, every conflict, every hellhole the Corps has been sent to for over 80 years. When they handed me mine at Camp Pendleton during infantry training, the instructor said something I never forgot. This knife has saved more Marines than any rifle ever made. Learn to use it, maintain it, trust it. It might be the only thing between you and a body bag someday. I carried that Kaibar through 2 combat deployments. I used it to cut through doors in Helmand Province, to dig fighting positions in frozen ground, to prepare food, maintain equipment, and handle 1,000 small tasks that come with life in a combat zone. When I left the service and started working as a wilderness guide, the Kaibar came with me. It was more than a tool, it was a reminder of who I'd been, what I'd survived, and the standards I'd held myself to. The flight was supposed to be routine, a small bush plane taking me from Whitehorse to a hunting lodge about 200 miles north. Deep in the Yukon backcountry, I was heading up early to prep the lodge for the season, clearing snow, checking supplies, making sure everything was ready for the clients who'd paid good money for a wilderness hunting experience. The pilot, Tom McKenzie, was experienced, over 30 years flying in the north. But experience doesn't matter when a sudden mechanical failure causes an engine fire in whiteout conditions. I saw the smoke first, smelled burning oil, heard the engine cough and die. Tom fought to keep us in the air, searching for anywhere flat enough to put down. But in the Yukon backcountry in March, there is no flat, just mountains, forests, and frozen lakes hidden under snow. We hit hard, spinning as we clipped a ridge, then tumbling down a steep slope into a stand of dense spruce trees. The impact was violence beyond description. Metal shrieking, trees shattering, my body thrown against the harness hard enough to crack ribs. Then silence. The terrible silence that comes after chaos, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and my own ragged breathing. I came to hanging sideways in my seat. The plane canted at a 45-degree angle, wedged between 2 massive trees. Blood was running into my left eye from a gash on my forehead. My chest screamed with pain, definitely cracked ribs, maybe broken. My left shoulder felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer, but I was conscious. I was breathing. I was alive. Tom wasn't. One look at the twisted cockpit told me he'd died on impact. Quick, at least. Better than freezing to death over hours in the wreckage. I said a quick prayer for him, Marine habit, and focused on my own situation. The plane was destroyed. Most of the cargo was either crushed, burned, or inaccessible under twisted metal. I managed to salvage my small day pack with a lighter, some jerky, and an emergency blanket. That was it. The satellite phone was shattered. The emergency locator transmitter had been ripped from its mount and was nowhere to be found. The survival kit I'd stowed in the back was buried under debris. I couldn't move with my injured ribs. But I had my Kaibar. It was still in its sheath on my belt, exactly where it had been for the last 12 years. I pulled it out and looked at the blade. Not a scratch, not a chip, ready to work. Before I tell you how I survived 40 days with nothing but this knife, I want to ask, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. How many of you have ever had to depend on a single tool to stay alive? The crash happened at 14:30 hours military time as habit for me. I had maybe 3.5 hours of usable daylight left before the temperature would drop from bad to lethal. In the Yukon, in early March, nighttime temperatures regularly hit -40°C. Without shelter, without fire, I'd be a corpse by morning. First things first, threat assessment. I did it automatically, the same way I'd done hundreds of times in combat zones. What's trying to kill me right now, and what can I do about it? Immediate threats, exposure, internal injuries, blood loss, predators. The temperature was already around -20, and dropping. My head wound was bleeding, but not arterial. I could deal with that. My ribs hurt like hell, but I could breathe without rattling sounds, which meant my lungs weren't punctured. The cold was the primary threat. I pulled out my emergency blanket, one of those thin mylar things. That's better than nothing, but not by much. Jan wrapped it around my shoulders. Then I started moving, carefully, testing my body's limits. The ribs protested, but held. I could walk, could use my arms. I was beat up, but operational. Next priority, shelter. The Marine Corps taught me that shelter is more important than food, more important than water, in extreme cold. You can survive weeks without food, days without water, but only hours without shelter, when the temperature wants to kill you. The wrecked plane was my first option, but one look told me it was a death trap. The angle it was sitting at meant any shift could send it tumbling further down the slope. The fuel smell was strong if there was a delayed fire. I'd be trapped. No. I needed to get away from the crash site and build something that wouldn't collapse and kill me. I looked around, using the tactical observation skills they'd drilled into me in recon training. The crash site was on a steep slope covered in dense spruce forest. About 30 meters upslope, I spotted a massive fallen tree probably knocked down by the plane's impact. Its root ball had been torn from the ground, creating a natural depression. Perfect for a shelter. I grabbed my day pack, took one last look at Tom's body, nothing I could do for him now, and started climbing. Every step was agony with my ribs, but I've operated with worse. In Helmand, I once patrolled for 6 hours with a cracked collarbone. Pain is just information. It tells you something's wrong, but it doesn't get to make decisions. At the fallen tree, I assessed the position. The root ball was about 8 feet across, creating a natural windbreak. The depression where the roots had been was about 4 feet deep. If I could roof it over and insulate it, I'd have shelter that would trap my body heat and keep me alive through the night. This is where the Kabar became essential. I needed to cut evergreen boughs for insulation and roofing, and I needed to do it fast. The sun was already dropping toward the horizon. I selected a spruce tree and went to work. The Kabar's blade was sharp enough to shave with. I keep all my tools properly maintained, military standard. I cut into the lower branches, using the technique they taught us in survival school. Cut at an angle. Let the branches wait. Do the work. Don't hack like you're in a horror movie. Efficient cuts conserve energy, and energy is life in survival situations. I cut dozens of bows, each one 3 to 4 feet long and heavy with needles. My injured ribs screamed protest with every swing, but I pushed through it. Pain is temporary. Freezing to death is permanent. With a pile of bows collected, I started construction. First, I lined the bottom of the root depression with thick branches, creating a platform that would insulate me from the frozen ground. Ground cold is a killer. It'll suck the heat out of your body faster than air temperature. The evergreen bed would trap air and create a barrier. Next, I created a framework by leaning broken branches against the root ball, then layered evergreen boughs over them like shingles on a roof, working from bottom to top so they'd shed water and wind. The structure was rough but functional, a debris shelter, same type I'd built dozens of times in training. The sun was touching the horizon by the time I finished. I crawled inside, pulling my pack in with me, and packed the entrance with more boughs to seal it. The space was barely large enough for me to lie down in, dark and cramped. But within minutes, I could feel the difference. My body heat was being trapped instead of radiating away into the infinite cold of the Yukon night. I pulled out my lighter and checked the fuel level, about 3/4 full. Fire would have to wait until morning. I couldn't risk using the lighter fuel when I didn't have materials properly prepared. One shot, that's what I might get if the lighter failed. I had to make it count. I ate one piece of jerky, chewing slowly, making it last. I had maybe 6 pieces total, 2 days of food if I was careful. After that, I'd need to hunt, trap, or starve. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight's problem was staying alive until morning. I wrapped myself in the Mylar emergency blanket, pulled my hood tight, and lay down on the bed of boughs. The ribs made it hard to find a comfortable position, but comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford anyway. The temperature continued to drop. I could hear the trees cracking in the cold, sharp sounds like rifle shots echoing through the forest. My breath created clouds of vapor in the darkness of my shelter. I tucked my hands into my armpits, curled into a ball, and began the long, painful process of shivering myself warm. The first night is always the hardest. Your body is in shock from whatever disaster has befallen you. Your mind keeps replaying what happened, looking for what you could have done differently. You're alone with your thoughts, your fear, and the absolute certainty that things are going to get worse before they get better. I thought about Tom, dead in that wreckage. I thought about the hunting lodge, where I was supposed to arrive tomorrow. When I didn't show up, would they look for us? Would they know where to search? The flight plan had been filed, but in the storm, we could have been blown miles off course. The search area would be enormous. I pushed those thoughts away. They weren't useful. I focused instead on what I could control. Staying warm, conserving energy, surviving until morning. Then I'd worry about day 2. The Marine Corps taught me that survival is a series of small victories. You don't survive 40 days in the wilderness. You survive 1 hour, then another, then another. You don't think about the impossible distance ahead. You focus on the next small goal. My goal for tonight was simple. Don't die. Wake up when the sun rises. Still breathing, still thinking, still capable of taking the next step. As I lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind howl through the trees and the temperature plummet, I felt the cobber's grip pressing against my side through my jacket. That piece of steel had been issued to me 13 years ago, and it had never failed. Not in Helmand Province, not in Arctic training in Norway, not in a dozen wilderness emergencies I'd dealt with as a guide. Tomorrow, I'd start putting it to work in ways I'd only practiced. Tomorrow, the real survival test would begin. But first, I had to make it through the night and something was moving outside my shelter. The sound that woke me wasn't loud, just a soft crunching in the snow, rhythmic and deliberate. Something was walking around my shelter. My eyes snapped open in the darkness, every sense immediately alert. Combat training never leaves you. Even asleep, part of your brain is always on guard, always listening for threats. I lay perfectly still, controlling my breathing, listening. The footsteps circled my shelter slowly. Whatever it was big. Too heavy to be a fox or a pine marten. Could be a wolf, could be a lynx, could be something worse. Then I heard it. A deep, chuffing breath. A bear. Had to be probably a black bear that had come out of hibernation early, drawn by the smell of the plane crash, looking for easy food. Or worse, a grizzly, though they were rare this far north in March. I slowly reached for the kabar, sliding it silently from its sheath. The blade wouldn't do much against a bear if it decided to dig me out of my shelter. Bears have 6-inch claws and can tear through logs, but it was better than nothing. I'd fought hand-to-hand in close-quarters combat in Afghanistan. I'd do it again if I had to. The bear circled twice more, sniffing, investigating, then the sounds moved away, heading down slope toward the crash site. I waited 15 minutes, listening, before allowing myself to relax slightly. The bear would find nothing edible in the wreckage, and would hopefully move on. But the encounter drove home a critical point. I was in predator country, injured, alone, and without firearms. The crowbar would have to serve as my only defense against whatever the wilderness threw at me. I waited for first light, which came around 0630, when I finally crawled out of my shelter. My body was a symphony of pain. The ribs were worse. I'd probably cracked them further while building the shelter. My head wound had clotted but pulled painfully when I moved. Every muscle ached from a night spent shivering in near-freezing temperatures. But I was alive. Day 1 complete. Day 2 beginning. First priority, fire. I needed heat to warm up, to dry my clothes, which were damp from condensation and sweat, and to boil water. The snow around me was clean enough to melt and drink, but untreated water is risky even in wilderness areas. You can get giardia or other parasites that will incapacitate you with dysentery. I used the crowbar to scrape away snow from a flat area near my shelter, creating a fire site on bare ground. Then I began collecting materials. This was basic survival tradecraft, the stuff they drilled into us in SEER school: survival, evasion, resistance, escape. For tinder, I carved fine shavings from the dry interior of dead spruce branches, creating a pile of material that would catch from a spark. For kindling, I broke up small dead twigs, sorting them by thickness. For fuel, I cut larger branches, again using the crowbar to split them into manageable sizes. The knife made the work possible. Without it, I would have been trying to break branches with my hands, wasting energy and probably failing. With it, I could process wood efficiently, creating exactly what I needed. I arranged my fire lay in a teepee structure, tinder in the center, kindling around it, larger fuel pieces ready to add once the fire was established. Then came the moment of truth. I pulled out the lighter, said a quick prayer, and sparked it. The flame caught on the first try. I carefully transferred it to the tinder, which began smoking immediately, then burst into flame. I added kindling gradually, building the fire up, protecting it from the wind with my body. Within 5 minutes, I had a real fire burning, and the psychological boost was enormous. Fire is life in wilderness survival. It provides warmth, purifies water, cooks food, signals rescue, and maybe most importantly reminds you that you're still human, still capable of controlling your environment. I sat in front of that fire and felt hope for the first time since the crash. I melted snow in my small metal cup, boiled it for a full minute, then drank it down. The hot water in my stomach was like medicine. I made 3 more cups, hydrating myself properly for the first time since the crash. Next, food situation assessment. I had 5 pieces of jerky left. At 1 piece per day, that was 5 days of food. After that, I'd have to hunt or trap game. The problem was that game is scarce in the Yukon in March. Most animals are still in winter mode, hibernating, conserving energy, avoiding movement. Finding them would be a challenge, but I had skills. The Marine Corps trains you for unconventional warfare, and that includes living off the land. I knew how to make snares, how to track animals, how to identify what was edible and what would kill you. The crowbar would be essential for all of it. Over the next 5 days, I established a survival routine. Each morning, I'd wake at first light, rebuild my fire, boil water, eat my single piece of jerky. Then I'd spend the day working on essential tasks, improving my shelter, setting snare traps, gathering firewood, scouting the area, and trying to figure out exactly where I was. The crowbar was in constant use. I used it to cut snare wire from the plane's wreckage, carefully scavenging what I could reach safely. I used it to fashion snare triggers from branches, carving precise notches that would release when an animal disturbed them. I used it to cut bark for cordage, to dig for roots that might be edible, to split logs for firewood. On day 3, I made a critical discovery, a small creek about a quarter mile from my shelter, partially frozen but with water flowing underneath. This was a lifeline. I could melt snow for water, but having access to liquid water saved fuel and time. More importantly, creeks in wilderness areas are highways for animals. If I set traps near the water, I'd have a better chance of catching something. I used the crowbar to cut green saplings, which I fashioned into deadfall traps and snares. A deadfall is simple but effective. You prop up a heavy log or rock with a trigger stick, bait it, and when an animal disturbs the bait, the weight crushes it. Brutal but efficient. I set up 6 deadfalls along the creek bank, using the last of my jerky as bait. On day 5, I checked my traps and found success. A snowshoe hare, caught in one of my snares. It wasn't much, maybe 2 pounds of meat, but it was protein, calories, and proof that I could feed myself. I used the crowbar to field dress the hare, removing the organs which I saved for trap bait, then skinning it carefully. The hide wasn't large enough to be useful for clothing, but I could use it for insulation in my shelter. I cut the meat into portions and cooked them over my fire, eating slowly, savoring every bite. That rabbit lasted me 2 days. By day 7, I'd caught 2 more. My trapping system was working. I was hungry all the time, operating on maybe 800 calories a day when I needed 3,000 to maintain my body weight in this cold. But I wasn't starving. Not yet. I also made improvements to my gear. Using the crowbar, I carved a better spear from a straight sapling, fire hardening the point and sharpening it to a fine edge. This could serve as a walking stick, a hunting weapon, and a defensive tool against predators. I fashioned a better water container from birch bark, using techniques I'd learned from indigenous survival instructors. The crowbar's sharp edge allowed me to cut the bark without tearing it. Then I sealed the seams with spruce pitch that I harvested and heated. Every day, the knife proved its worth. Every day, I found new uses for it. It wasn't just a tool, it was the difference between gradual competence and rapid failure. By the end of day 7, I'd established a sustainable, barely survival pattern. I had shelter, fire, water, and minimal food. My injuries were healing slowly. I hadn't seen the bear again, though I'd found tracks near the creek that confirmed it was still in the area. I'd also come to terms with a harsh reality. Rescue wasn't coming anytime soon. The search area was too large, the weather too unpredictable, and my exact location unknown. If I was going to survive, it would be for the long haul. But on the morning of day 8, everything changed. I found human footprints in the snow near my camp, fresh prints, less than 6 hours old. Someone else was out here, and whoever it was, they'd been watching me. I stared at the footprints, my mind racing through possibilities. The prints were clear. Modern boots, size 11 or 12, definitely human. They approached to within 50 feet of my shelter, circled around, then headed back into the forest toward the northeast. The tracks told a story. Whoever made them had been moving carefully, deliberately. They'd stopped multiple times. I could see where they'd stood still. The snow compressed more deeply. They'd been observing me, watching my camp, assessing me. Question was, friend or foe? In wilderness areas this remote, you don't encounter people by accident. Either this was someone from a search and rescue team, or it was someone who had their own reasons for being out here. Trapper, maybe, poacher, or someone running from something. I followed the tracks for about 200 yards, moving cautiously, my hand never far from the crowbar's grip. The tracks led to a spot where someone had waited for a long time, at least an hour. Based on how much snow had accumulated in the depressions, they'd been watching my camp from concealment. Then the tracks led away, heading northeast in a straight line, purposeful. I made a decision. I would try to make contact. Whoever this was, they might have supplies, information about where we were, maybe even a radio. Even if they didn't want to share, knowing another human was in the area changed my survival calculus. I spent the rest of day 8 improving my camp's visibility. Using the crowbar, I cut green branches and arranged them in a large X pattern near my shelter, a universal distress signal. I built up my fire so the smoke would be more visible. I created a reflector behind the fire using the wreckage as aluminum, angling it to bounce light and smoke upward. Then I waited. Day 9 brought snow, not a blizzard, but steady, heavy flakes that reduced visibility and covered the mysterious tracks. I kept my fire going, used the time to work on my equipment. With the crowbar, I carved better trap triggers, fashioned fish hooks from bits of wire and wood, created a bow drill fire starter as a backup in case my lighter finally died. The bow drill was painstaking work. I needed a straight spindle, a flat baseboard with a notch, a socket to hold the top of the spindle, and a bow with cordage. The crowbar was essential for every component, carving the pieces to precise dimensions, cutting the notch at exactly the right angle, shaping the socket. I tested it that evening. It took 20 minutes of effort, my hands cramping, arms burning, but I got smoke, then an ember, then fire. I now had a reliable backup fire starting method. One more layer of security. Day 10. Still no sign of the stranger, but I had a breakthrough with food. I'd been checking the creek daily, and I noticed fish small Arctic grayling, holding in the pools under the ice. They were lethargic in the cold water, but they were calories. I used the crowbar to cut a hole in the ice, then fashioned a fishing spear by lashing my knife to a long pole with cordage I'd made from spruce roots. It was crude but functional. I stood over the hole for 2 hours, waiting motionless, until finally, a fish drifted within range. I struck fast. The fish, impaled on the blade, thrashed violently. I pulled it up and dispatched it quickly. 8 ounces of meat? Maybe. Not much, but combined with my rabbit trapping, it was enough to stop my slow starvation. Days 11 and 12 were spent improving my shelter and extending my trap lines. I was ranging further from camp now. My ribs healed enough that I could move without constant pain. The crowbar never left my side. I used it to blaze trail markers on trees so I could find my way back, to clear brush from my paths, to defend myself when I encountered a lynx that was definitely sizing me up as potential prey. The lynx encounter on day 12 reminded me how vulnerable I was. The big cat followed me for half a mile, staying just at the edge of visibility, watching with those eerie predatory eyes. I gripped the crowbar in one hand, my spear in the other, making myself look large and aggressive. Eventually the lynx decided I was more trouble than I was worth and disappeared into the forest. But it was a close thing. On day 13, I expanded my search of the crash site. I'd been avoiding it because of the emotional weight and because I wasn't sure if the fuel might ignite. But I needed to see if there was anything else I could salvage. Using the crowbar, I carefully pried at twisted metal, creating openings where I could reach inside. I found treasure, a small hatchet that had been strapped to the side of my pack, bent but functional. A tarp, torn but still usable, 20 feet of paracord, a small first aid kit. These finds were enormous. The hatchet especially would make wood processing so much more efficient, saving the crowbar's edge for finer work. But the most important find was in Tom's survival vest, a signal mirror and a whistle. The mirror was unbroken, and in sunlight it could flash a signal visible for miles. The whistle could be heard for over a mile in good conditions. These doubled my chances of being spotted if a search plane flew over. That night, I upgraded my shelter using the tarp as a roof, making it more weatherproof. I organized my gear, taking stock of what I had: crowbar, knife, primary tool, small hatchet, wood processing, lighter approximately 1/4 fuel remaining, bow drill, fire starter backup, signal, mirror, and whistle, paracord, 20 feet, emergency blanket, small first aid kit, fishing spear, homemade, multiple snares and deadfalls, various carved tools. It wasn't much, but it was a kit that could keep me alive indefinitely if I was careful and skilled. The crowbar remained the most versatile piece. It had been involved in creating or improving almost everything else. Day 14 brought clear skies and bitter cold. I spent the morning checking traps, one rabbit, caught overnight, and the afternoon working on my next project, a better weapon. The spear was okay for fish in close defense, but I needed something with range. I decided to create a throwing stick, basically a heavy wooden club that you can hurl at small game. Using the hatchet to rough out the shape and the crowbar to refine it, I carved a boomerang-like weapon from a curved branch. I spent 2 hours practicing throws, learning the weapon's flight characteristics. It wasn't perfect, but I managed to hit a tree trunk from 30 feet, about 1 throw in 3. Good enough to maybe knock down a grouse or a rabbit if I caught one in the open. As the sun set on day 14, I felt something I hadn't felt since the crash. Confidence, not comfort. I was still cold, still hungry, still injured and alone, but confident that I had the skills and tools to survive. The crowbar had been essential to building that confidence. Every day it proved reliable. Every day it solved problems I couldn't solve with my bare hands. I was settling in by my fire, roasting the rabbit I'd caught, when I heard it, a voice calling from the darkness. Hello, the camp, coming in friendly. The stranger had finally made contact. I grabbed the crowbar and stood up, facing the direction of the voice, ready for whatever came next. The man who stepped into my firelight looked like he'd been living rough for months. Heavy beard, gaunt face, clothes patched and repatched with scraps of hide and cloth. But his eyes were sharp and alert, and his hands were empty and visible, a peace gesture. Name's Garrett, he said, stopping about 15 feet from my fire. Saw your signal smoke a couple days ago. Figured I'd check if you were friendly before making contact. I kept the crowbar ready but not threatening. Jack Morrison. My plane crashed 8 miles south of here, 14 days ago. You got a radio? Any way to call for rescue? He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. If I had a radio, you think I'd be living like this? I'm stranded same as you, friend. Been out here since November. 4 months. My blood ran cold. What happened? Helicopter went down. Pilot died. I've been surviving day to day ever since. He gestured toward my fire. Mind if I warm up? Been a while since I've seen another living soul. I made a tactical decision. This man had approached peacefully, was willing to talk, and having another person around could double our chances of survival. Come ahead, slowly. Garrett moved into the firelight and sat down across from me, extending his hands to warm them. Up close, I could see he was in rough shape, signs of frostbite on his nose and ears, his fingers scarred from cold damage, his clothes barely holding together. Over the next hour, we exchanged stories. He'd been a geologist doing mineral surveys when his helicopter encountered mechanical problems and went down. He'd been surviving alone through the entire Yukon winter, temperatures down to -55, hunting and trapping, moving camp whenever resources ran low in an area. I gotta say, he told me, eyeing my camp setup, you're doing better than most would after 2 weeks. That shelter's well built. You got a good fire discipline. You ex-military, Marine Corps, Force Recon. Survival training was part of the package. He nodded appreciatively. Shows. Listen, I got a proposition. I'm camped about 3 miles north of here, near a lake that's got good fishing through the ice. I've got more gear than you. Do manage to salvage more from my crash, but I'm getting weak. Haven't caught much game lately. You seem like you've got your shit together. We team up, we double our chances of making it until spring thaw, when search planes can fly more regularly. It made sense logically. 2 people can accomplish more than one, can keep watch while the other sleeps, can range further to hunt and trap. But something in my gut, the same instinct that had kept me alive in Afghanistan, was whispering caution. What do you have that I need? I asked carefully. Full survival kit? Better tools? More traps? Fish hooks? A sleeping bag? Half a tent? And most important, I know this area. I've been exploring for months. I know where the game trails are, where the good fishing spots are, where to avoid because of unstable ice. I made my decision. We'll try it. But we keep our own camps, pool resources, work together on big projects. I'm not consolidating everything into one camp until I know you better. He grinned. Smart. I'd do the same. Let's shake on it. We shook hands, and for the next 13 days, we worked together. Garrett hadn't been lying. He did know the area, and his guidance helped me establish better trap lines. He showed me locations where ptarmigan, a type of Arctic grouse, congregated, which I could target with my throwing stick. Together, we built a better ice fishing setup, catching enough grayling to supplement our diet significantly. I shared my military survival knowledge with him. We built improved shelters using techniques I'd learned in Arctic warfare training. I showed him how to layer his clothing properly to manage moisture. I taught him the bow drill, fire-starting method I'd developed. The Kabar remained my most used tool, but with access to Garrett's gear, I could save its edge for precision work. His kit included a whetstone, and I spent an evening putting a razor edge back on the blade, restoring it to perfect sharpness. But as the days passed, I started noticing things that troubled me. Garrett would disappear for hours without explanation. I'd see him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression calculating. Small items from my camp went missing, nothing critical, but enough to make me wary. On day 23 I followed him. He'd claimed he was checking the distant trap line, but I waited 10 minutes and then tracked him through the snow, moving silently using skills I'd learned in recon: how to place your feet to avoid noise, how to use terrain and vegetation for concealment. Garrett went to his camp, but he didn't stop there. He continued another half-mile to a location he'd never mentioned before. There, hidden under a camouflage tarp and pine boughs, was a cache of supplies, food, fuel, canisters, even a rifle. He had a rifle. While I'd been struggling to trap rabbits and spearfish, he'd had a working firearm and stockpiles of food. He'd been lying to me from the start. I watched from concealment as he checked his cache, pulled out a chocolate bar, ate it casually, then restocked some items. He stood there for a long moment, looking back toward our camps, and I saw something on his face that made my blood run cold. It wasn't hunger or desperation. It was calculation. He was planning something. I moved back to my camp quietly, my mind racing. Why would he hide supplies from me? Why pretend to be as desperate as I was? The only answer that made sense was that he didn't want me as a partner. He wanted something else. Maybe my gear. Maybe he was waiting for me to let my guard down completely before he took everything I had and left me to die. Or worse. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my fire with the crowbar in my hand, alert for any sound. Around 0300 hours, I heard it. Careful footsteps approaching my camp. I'd strung a simple early warning system fishing line with pebbles tied to a tand. I heard the faint rattle as someone crossed it. I slipped out of my shelter silently and moved into the shadows. Watching, a figure approached my camp. Garrett, moving stealthily, something in his hand. I couldn't see what it was in the darkness, but his body language was all wrong. This wasn't a friendly visit. Looking for something? I called out from behind him. He spun, startled. Jesus, Jack, you scared the hell out of me. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check if you wanted company. With what you're holding behind your back? Slowly, he brought his hand around. It was a large rock. This found it on the way. Interesting mineral composition. I'm a geologist, remember? At 3 in the morning, in the dark, right? I moved out of the shadows. The crowbar visible in my hand. I found your cache. Garrett, I know you've been lying to me. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and walk away from my camp. We're done partnering. You stay in your area, I stay in mine, and we don't have a problem." His expression changed. The friendly mask dropped away, and what was underneath was cold and hard. "Can't do that, Jack. See? I need your gear. That knife, especially military grade, good steel, and your lighter. Mine's almost dead. Winter's not over yet. I need every advantage. You've got a rifle and supplies? You don't need anything from me. Not about need, it's about insurance. Can't leave you out here as competition for resources. This area can barely support one person. Two is stretching it." He hefted the rock. "Was gonna make it quick. You wouldn't have felt anything." The situation crystallized with terrible clarity. He'd been planning to kill me in my sleep and take my gear. The partnership had been a setup from the beginning, a way to get close, to learn my routines, to find the right moment. "You really want to try this?" I asked quietly. "Marines train for close quarters combat. I've done it for real. Multiple times, not in good shape. You're half starved, and I'm ready for you. Walk away, Garrett. Last chance." For a moment I thought he might be rational. Then he lunged forward, swinging the rock at my head. Marine Corps martial arts program training took over. I sidestepped, let his momentum carry him past me, and drove my elbow into his kidney. He grunted, stumbled, came back with a wild swing. I blocked with my forearm, used his own weight against him, and took him to the ground. The fight lasted maybe 30 seconds. He was desperate and had some strength left, but he wasn't trained and he telegraphed every move. I got him into a control hold. The crowbar pressed against his throat just hard enough to make the point clear. "It's over," I said. "I don't want to kill you, but I will if you make me. You're going to pack your gear and move at least 10 miles away. If I see you near my camp again, I won't give you another warning." He was breathing hard, eyes wide with fear and rage. "You're making a mistake. Out here alone, you won't make it. I've made it this far. I'll take my chances." I stood up slowly, keeping the knife ready. "Start walking, now." He got to his feet, gave me a look full of hatred, and disappeared into the darkness. I listened to his footsteps fade, then spent the next 2 hours relocating my camp to a more defensible position, setting up better early warning systems, and preparing for the possibility that he might come back. He didn't. Over the next 5 days, I saw no sign of him. I moved my camp twice more, just to be safe, and spent every night on high alert. The encounter had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. I'd survived the crash, the cold, the hunger, the isolation, but I'd nearly been killed by another human being, someone I'd trusted, however cautiously. The Kabar had been there when I needed it. Not as a weapon of first resort, but as a tool of last resort. It had saved my life, not by killing, but by being present, ready, sharp enough, and strong enough to tip the balance in a life-or-death situation. By day 28, I'd established a new camp in a more secure location, with better sightlines and multiple escape routes. My trap lines were producing steadily. My ice fishing was keeping me fed. I was surviving, alone again, but wiser for the experience.